Welcome back for part 2 of our discussion of the CIE 404 Issues and Institutions in International Educational Development class, course, website, and syllabus. We were just talking about some of the sort of administrative details about when the class was offered, how it worked for on-campus versus online international students, what some of the policies were, etc. And now we're going to dive into really some of the content, some of the meat of the class, and talk about what that means. So let's take a look at the course description and just have a little discussion about what this is saying. First of all, it starts out by emphasizing that yes, education is a powerful tool for creating opportunities, eliminating inequalities, and enabling people to overcome poverty and other disadvantages. That means that educational development and poverty reduction are integrally linked issues in comparative and international education and development research. And that's going to be a key focus for us as we're moving through this course. Educational development and poverty reduction are linked together. So when we talk about education for development, we're often talking about this poverty reduction purpose of education. Education for development is also a key agenda of international development organization. And you can see this. Education, especially for girls, is often seen as being essential to promoting national economic growth and improving lives. I don't know why it took people so long to realize this, but it turns out, surprise, surprise, that girls and women are keys to unlocking economic success and development in communities worldwide. It's also seen that access to education is not only a means for development, but it's also a basic human right. And we're actually going to start the class by looking in the very first week at how education is a human right and how the human rights agenda has literally shaped education for development, for 100 years or more, right? But international development organizations are really only one way of thinking about which institutions impact educational development. There are also governments. There are non-governmental organizations like the United Nations. There are other institutions that create educational opportunities and support educational systems. These are, non-governmental would not be the United Nations. A governmental organization would be the United Nations. A non-governmental organization would be something like Save the Children. Sorry for that blip. It's the first of many to happen in class. Right? So we're trying to figure out what are the kinds of institutions that influence education for development, remembering that education for development is integrally linked to poverty reduction and human rights issues. And then, of course, what does comparative and international education research reveal about the effectiveness of pedagogical approaches to teaching and learning in various national contexts? Now, this is something, if you're in my other class, my CIE 400 class, this is also something that we're very interested in. How does pedagogy influence teaching and learning? How do international development organizations influence pedagogy, which is approaches to teaching and learning? And what are the roles of other institutions in supporting, improving, and facilitating education? Finally, what methods can we use to measure the effectiveness of different approaches? So these are a lot of the questions we're going to explore in this class. These are the same questions that are posted on the website, which is probably why I stumbled through them just now, because I know that I've just talked about them in the previous screencast. But you'll get the picture one way or the other. Next, let's talk a little bit about the objectives of the class. By the end of the course, I am going to expect you to understand the way in which different educational systems, pedagogical approaches, and organizational structures have evolved in a variety of cultures and country contexts. The context issue is going to be enormous. It's enormous. In comparative and international education, broadly speaking, it's incredibly important. In our program at Lehigh University, it's a key element of what we do because, as you may have already heard me say more than once, we are driven by our investigation of both the overlap and the integration and the synthesis of, as well as the resistance and the conflict between globalization and contextualization. So we're doing the same thing in this class. We're looking at ways that globalization is a part of international development through education. And we're looking at the ways that context shapes that, especially with education, which is so unique and personal and embedded in communities. Next, we want you to be able to explain the role that education plays in a country's national development. That is a very straightforward thing. It is not as easily done. The reason being is that the role that education plays in a country's national development is there's not just one answer. There's not just one role. And it's not always a standalone or a unique role. It's often embedded in other sorts of issues or agendas or institutions. Next, we want you to be able to critically evaluate the role of international organizations, including donors and non-governmental organizations or NGOs, in educational development around the world. Now, by critically evaluate, I don't want to give the impression that we are going to go too light or going to go too hard on international organizations that are involved in education for development. There are good things and bad things that come out of these kinds of organizations, and a lot of the value of these efforts to use education for development depends on your own perspective or background. So things that look good from my Western male middle class American perspective might not be the same thing, or might not look as good if you are sitting in the country that is on the receiving end of the international organization's efforts. So we'll be talking about some of those contrasts in perspective, in values, and using that as a way to critically evaluate how international organizations are involved in educational development, rather than just saying there is a blanket criticism or a blanket way of looking at what international organizations are doing. Next, we're going to identify how technologies and innovations in education impact developing countries or emerging countries, or whatever phrase we want to use. And we're also going to look at ways of measuring educational outcomes using those technologies and innovations. And we're going to be doing that not in a direct way necessarily, because technology and innovation in education, especially when it comes to education for development, are embedded all along the way. There are many different ways that technology and innovation sort of raise up or rear their heads in an investigation of education for development. So we'll be addressing that throughout the course. And then finally, we need, from just a more theoretical and a comparative international perspective, we need to be able to differentiate between organizations, institutions, and the process of institutionalization. And that seems like we might be splitting hairs just when we sort of say the words right now, but there are unique ways of approaching each of these elements that contribute to education for development. And we'll be addressing that in the class. Now, some requirements. One, it's an advanced introductory course, but it's still introductory, so there are no prerequisites required. You are expected to attend all classes and arrive on time. I'd like for you to have completed all the readings and assignments prior to the class. And if you are at a distance and unable to make it live with us for whatever reason, time zone work, whatever, you are expected to watch and comment on all of the recorded classes. So you need to attend. You're just attending asynchronously rather than synchronously. You will also have a group project that you will be working on in groups, and you will have I'm calling it here a two-part take-home exam. It's a midterm essay with 2 questions, right, that you will do. I would like for you to obviously treat everyone in the class with courtesy and respect. I would really appreciate it if you would turn your cell phone off, and I'll try to do the same. And if you could sort of keep your use of your laptop to classroom uses, that would be great. All right, we've already talked about modes of instruction, academic integrity, and accommodations for students with special needs. Let's begin talking a little bit about course grading and assignments. You have several different things that you're going to be doing over the course of the semester. For convenience sake, these all add up to 100. So for participation, that's 10% of your grade. You will lead discussion of the readings on one of the weeks of our class. That's 10% of your grade. You will propose a website. That's going to be your group project. That's 10% of your grade. You will do the individual midterm essays. That's 30% of your grade. That's a chunk. You will actually develop and publish online a website. Again, that's your group project. That's 30% of your grade. And then you will present that website to the class. That's 10%. So for a big total of 100%. Now let's talk about each of these, starting with participation, and then we'll move on to the next screencast and talk about the rest. So every week, you are expected to come to class prepared to discuss the assigned readings, to ask questions about the readings, and to engage your peers in an informed discussion about the assigned readings and topic. You'll remember that I said already that this is a participatory seminar. So I am not going to be giving you a 3-hour lecture, right? I may provide some orientation to the readings, but I expect you to come having already done the readings, having some questions ready, and being willing to engage your graduate program peers in an informed discussion around that. So this really is a time for us to explore what we think, how we're framing these ideas, and get into some really interesting discussions. So I'm going to ask you to be very active in participating in class discussions. And I'm going to ask you, when you do participate, to demonstrate that you understand and can synthesize the assigned readings. Right? Make sure that it is clear that you are doing the readings and that you're able to connect them with the issues and the topics and the institutions that we're discussing. If you are not a person who has a photographic memory, you might want to come prepared with notes and questions from the readings, and be very vocal in posing your questions and engaging me and your classmates in a discussion that is relevant to that week's topics and readings. And if you need help preparing for class, I suggest you use something like the weekly reading memos template, which I've included at the end of the syllabus. But listen, it's not required that you use that. I'm just saying that this is a tool you can use if you need help preparing for class. And since this is a class that has both on-campus and online students, it's going to be especially important that you participate through our website in the discussion threads. As I already showed you in the last screencast, the discussion threads, the pages for the discussion threads are already online for each week. And as a part of your participation grade, you're expected to post comments or thoughts to each of the week's topics or readings by the end of the day every Thursday. That's after class. And you are required to begin with a paragraph, which is 5 sentences minimum, of constructive criticism of the comments that were posted immediately before you for that week. This is how we're going to engage one another using the discussion thread online. If, however, you are the first person to post comments for that week, you don't have to write any criticism. You just post your own stuff. So there's an incentive to be the first person. And let me show you how this works. If we go to the discussion, actually we go to week 1, you'll see that it's just more instructions. To post your comment, see the leave a reply box? This is where you can post a comment or critique for the class readings and discussion. Very exciting, isn't it? All right, and then you post the comment. It's literally that easy. And look, then it shows up and it says, Professor Wiseman says, ta-da! Now when you do this the first time that you post, I have to approve your post in order for it to show. That's just a way of keeping spammers from getting on here. But after you've been approved once, you should be able to post freely and see your comments immediately. So that is going to be very important. It's very important that you put your comments up, that you are participating every week, that you are coming prepared. This is a graduate level seminar, so it's normal. It's normal to do this sort of thing. All right? I'm going to pause here and we'll come back in the next screencast and talk about student-led discussions and other stuff.